Hello, my loves. Welcome to yet another episode of the Becoming You podcast. I am super excited, as always, to be talking with you guys every single week about something that I feel inspired about or answering a question that I'm sure that you guys maybe wonder about. So today, the topic is signs that the inner work is working even though you don't see any changes. I remember when I first started out working with the life coach, like I was still in that mindset of I need to have instant gratification, like anything, right? Like you're working out, like you're brushing teeth, or you're using a teeth whitener, you have changed your diet recently to eat more healthy, whatever changes we make in life, our mind, first of all, is was probably resistant to incorporating anything new, right? Like our brains are so programmed to be efficient that a change in anything causes disruption. It requires more energy from us when we make changes. And our brain doesn't like that because, like I said, it's wired for efficiency. So when we go to this effort of making changes, incorporating something new in our life, it causes friction in our life, even though you know that you're doing it for the overall longevity, long term benefits of your life. So, not only are you now putting in extra effort, your brain is now trying to tell you, hey, stop doing that. Like, this requires extra effort from me. I don't like it. So, there's resistance that your mind is throwing up. In order to overcome the resistance, your mind is saying, look, it's not working. It's not working. Your mind, that's what your mind is trying to prove. And so when we don't see changes right away from the habits or new habits that we pick up, we get discouraged. Not because you don't have willpower, it's just because how your brain is programmed. Your brain didn't want to do it in the first place. You are motivating yourself and you're thinking about the long term, which is the way it should be, right? And you get off to a good start, but then your mind, it's your mind that it's facing the resistance. It doesn't want you to keep doing it because it requires extra effort and energy from you. And it's like, hey, you've already laid down neural pathways to be very efficient. And so now you're having to reprogram and create new neural pathways, which takes a lot of effort. So it's actually your mind's fault, right, for discouraging you and seeking instant gratification and instant rewards for any changes that you make in life. So don't blame and judge yourself. Just understand that, hey, my mind and my brain is very efficient and it just hates change. So I was in that boat of anytime I work with somebody new, I'd want results right away. And when I felt like it wasn't working, I would get so discouraged and I would be so hard on myself and I would feel so alone. And most detrimental was I'd feel a lot of shame. But if you are in that space of maybe you have tried to make some changes and you've given up, or you are in that phase of persisting, right? Like you are still putting in the work, but you're starting to feel discouraged of like, man, I don't really know whether this stuff is working. And you might be in that area of like, I'm really tempted to throw in the towel. I wanted to give you some signs that you can look out for that the inner work that you may be doing is working. Okay? Because if you're listening to this podcast episode, I'm going to assume that you are doing the inner work in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to these episodes and my podcast. Because my podcast is designed to help you make very intentional changes in your life to help inspire you to just create this beautiful life that you're excited to wake up to, right? So let's get started. If you've been doing the inner work, either reading books, personal development books, listening to other podcasts where they give you suggestions and some golden nuggets, maybe you've talked to a friend, maybe you've talked to a therapist and they've given you some tools, etc. And you are really in that space of excavating what is going on in my internal landscape. Why do I think the way I do? Why do I play small? Why do I hold back my truth? Why do I not stand up for myself? Why am I always people pleasing? Why is it so important for me to impress others? Like we know that we have these ways of operating that are not helpful. So you might be starting to make some changes. Maybe you're starting to have some difficult conversations, right? So how can you tell, hey, is this working? Like, is my work working? One of the first things I want to tell you is that this is not the list yet. That, I always mention that it takes time for no, I don't mention this. Let me backtrack. I'm all over the place today. So I've talked a lot about how if you want to change your outer reality, it starts with changing your inner reality, right? You cannot wait for your feelings to change based on how your external results are. That's why you are in the situation you're in. That's why maybe you feel anger a lot. Maybe you feel resentment a lot. Maybe you feel bitter in life. Maybe you feel unfulfilled, right? Because you're waiting for things in the external environment, in your reality to change so that you can feel better on the inside. That is upside down. I will say this till the end of time, till I die, till I'm in my grave, that in order to change your outer reality, you have to start from within. Otherwise, it's going to be a fruitless escapade, right? It won't work. That formula is broken. So when you start doing internal work, internal healing, it's going to take time for reality to reflect that, right? Like I said, it's not an instant, oh, I changed this within me. I changed my attitude. I changed my mindset. I healed this part of me that was wounded, right? Like immediately you don't wake up and the next day that aspect of your life has completely changed. It doesn't work like that. So know that there is a time lag. It might not be months and months. It doesn't have to be years. It could be weeks. It could be days. Sometimes it's hours, right? But a lot of times it's days and weeks. It takes time for your reality to start reflecting the inner changes you're making. So let me give you an example. A lot of times when you start doing the inner work, you start to realize that some of the people in your life who you used to love, you still want them around, but they're not good for you, right? So you might start making internal boundaries of like, I'm going to cut back on the amount of time I spend with this person, right? That might be just something completely internal that you do. You have not communicated this with anyone, right? And then, like, maybe let's say a month goes by where you have really said kind of no, like maybe you haven't been direct with this person, but you've just kind of been avoiding them. And you've just not spent as much time with this person. In a month's time, they might bring it up in conversation, be like, hey, I've noticed that we haven't spent as much time together. Like, is it just me, or am I just making, am I just making that up, or do you feel the same? So now you have a chance to bring up the fact that it might be time to put some more distance between you, or maybe you're still scared to have this really difficult conversation, right? So you see that there had to be a month lag between you making that internal boundary and deciding I want to spend less time with this person to now that person actually noticing it. So now your reality is starting to change, right? But you still might have to do more work for that to become true. So you could completely cut off this relationship, do it the passive way, which I would not recommend, by the way, because it's a very slow process. Or you could take a more active role and say, I have been taking, some time like back for myself. I've needed to work on myself. Or you could say something like, I've noticed that there are some unhealthy patterns in our relationship, and I've just had to reevaluate going forward, like what this relationship needs to look like, and have a really difficult, awkward conversation. But that might expedite how your relationship changes and bring about changes much, much, much faster. But I'm going off on a tangent, but that's how, internal changes then lead to external changes in your reality, but it takes time. So be patient with yourself, but it is inevitable that as long as you keep doing the inner work of excavating, cleaning, tweaking, and calling in like new rules for your life that help improve your external reality cannot but help change. Okay, so sign number one, that the inner work is working even though you don't see any changes. You might notice that things that used to get under your skin don't have the amount of like intensity that it used to. So maybe like your kids. So my kids are a big trigger, and I think they're big triggers for a lot of people because they bring up stuff within us. So if your kids are being extra loud, right? Like I'm somebody who does not enjoy loud noises, and I have two boys and they're extremely loud a lot of the times. They play loud, they fight loud, they make loud noises. They're always making noise of some sort, or either the music's on loud. They're just loud people. And I don't do well with loud noises, right? And in the past, I would like really snap at them or yell at them without knowing why I was getting so triggered. And I would think, oh, I'm just stressed about work, or I'm just tired, I haven't had enough sleep. Yes, all of that still contributes to me still getting annoyed, by the way. It's not that I don't get annoyed anymore, but the level of intensity or the level of annoyance is not as deep, and my response is also very different. I ask them to turn down the noise level or be more respectful of the fact that I'm in the room and it's really hurting my ears. I am more patient, I'm more empathetic, I'm more compassionate. And when I ask them, it comes from a very respectful place and a considerate place, not demanding respect or instilling fear or intimidation in them for them to turn down their noise levels, right? So the way I respond has changed. So this is not to say that you won't ever get upset, right? There might still be a lot of wounds and insecurities and the triggers that still upset you. But as soon as I start working with my clients, what they find is that they might still have the same reaction as before, but their awareness kicks in very quickly and they go, oh, I've just done the thing that I don't want to do, right? Like I've just reacted in an old way that I'm not proud of, that I'm still working on. And they're able to take responsibility much, much faster instead of just constantly blaming somebody else. So, point number 2, you stop expecting the problematic situation to change and start working on changing your perspective and attitude towards the problem. So, the second sign is that, before the inner healing, I was always playing the victim. Why is this happening to me? This is not happening to anybody else. Man, she's so much better off than I am. I'm so behind, right? I wanted the situation, whatever was causing the unrest and the discomfort within me, to change so that I could be more comfortable. But now, what happens is, and what happens with my clients, is that they stop trying for the problem to go away and instead ask, what is the solution that will help me deal with this problem, right? When you start to do the inner healing, you realize that problems and challenges will continue to come up in your life. That is not the game that we are here to play. What we are here to play is, how do I change my response? How do I change my thinking to the problem and the challenge? Instead of expecting the problem and the challenge to go away, you ask yourself, what can I do that's within my control so that I can respond to this and make it to my advantage? Okay? So we're always working on what is it that we can control. So you might find that you're asking yourself that. You stop waiting for the problem to disappear on its own and you start asking yourself, okay, there is a challenge here in my life that's presenting itself. Is there something that I can do to shift my mindset or change my perspective to work with the problem so that I can use this problem to help me grow in my life? That is an attitude and a perspective shift that you will start to notice when you started doing the inner work. If you're doing that, that means the inner work is working, okay? You might find that you are a lot closer, this is number 3, by the way, that you're a lot closer to having the difficult conversations with the people around you, and you're starting to take some very small steps to letting people know that things need to change. This might be an offhand comment to your spouse. You might say things like, I've been reading, this book, or this book really opened my eyes to this. Like, what do you think about it? Or what do you think about us working on it together? Or I've noticed we have this pattern with our kids, and I think we need to change this going forward. Or how about we try this, right? Like, you're starting to really implement and think about how can I apply the stuff that I am learning and I'm thinking about into my life. And you might be even thinking about, oh, like I need to have that really hard conversation with that person who now I know is not good for me. And you might not have had this actual conversation with them, but you might be wondering, how do I bring this up into conversation? When do I have this conversation, right? Like it's a very tangible thing that you're playing with, that you are maybe role playing in your head, and you're formulating an actual plan, right, to have these difficult conversations. And you might even be distancing yourself. That's like a very physical, tangible change that you can make until you have until you have a plan formulated, and until you have the courage to have these difficult conversations. So what used to be wishful thinking is you are now starting to formulate a plan, and maybe even getting some dates and timelines under your belt. And that's another sign that the inner work is working. People might be saying, hey, like you look different or you're acting different. Like a lot of my clients have this show up, is that all they've been doing is the internal work, right? Reshifting things internally, really just shifting their perspective, changing their attitude towards things, welcoming challenges into their life, letting go of the conditioning, or starting to see how much they've been conditioned to think and act in a certain way. And when they start to see it, like that they've been living under an illusion, right, of what they think they're like, and starting to, like, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where you've been looking at a puzzle a certain way, and then you shift your perspective and the whole picture changes. That's what's happening in your inner healing, right? And so people start to say, you look different, or there's something different about you. Have you been, working out? Like people start to notice a physical change, but they can't quite put their finger on what's changed about you, but they can just tell something's changing, and people might have made comments or observations. That's the beauty of inner healing, right? Like here is the sign that it's working, because people are noticing something is different about you, but they're not able to tell what. And that is a very good sign, because your energy is changing. And people can't see energy, they can't touch energy, but they can absolutely sense and feel energy, which is why they're having a hard time putting their finger on what's different about her, but I know something's different. Maybe it's the way you carry yourself. Maybe it's your confidence has gone up a notch. Maybe you feel a little bit more self-assured. Maybe your stress levels have gone down a little bit, right? All of those things add up, and now your energy feels different to people who see you on a daily basis. Number 5, when you wake up in the morning, you're starting to feel hopeful and excited about the day instead of dreading the day. I cannot tell you the number of times I have woken up dreading the day. Like, that is the most awful feeling to wake up with. And I own it, right? I lived for a long time like that, and there was a lot of reasons that contributed to that. One of which was my health. I went from being a very healthy person to being diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease, which caused a lot of physical pain. So just getting out of bed was hard. That was just a physical aspect of it. And you guys know my story really well. I was just a very unhappy person, even though on the outside I presented myself as a very happy, bubbly, outgoing, has it all together kind of person. I didn't know how to communicate with my spouse, so a marriage was like okay. Like I felt okay as a mother. I felt okay with my life. Like everything was just okay. And that okayness is really a symptom of I don't want to deal. Like everything looks okay on the surface, even though deep down, like I'm worried about looking underneath the surface, because if I open that can of worms, I'm so scared about what I'm going to find. Or maybe there is nothing even to find. And I used to default to this idea of, I think life is just meant to be like this when you grow up and become an adult and do adult things, which is so not true, by the way. Right? So now I wake up and I feel hopeful and excited and purposeful. Like I feel like I have a purpose in this life. And it doesn't just come from what I do for a living, right? It didn't just happen because I happened to find that life coach was my calling. It happens because I feel like I'm a good mother. I feel like I'm a great spouse. I feel like I'm a really good human being that has something to contribute to humanity in my own small way. I don't feel insignificant, which is why I think I used to wake up out of bed feeling dreadful, because I used to feel so small. I used to feel so insignificant and so lost in this life. Like, what is, like, I didn't feel connected to anything. So when you're living life, which is meant to be about connection, and you lack that connection, you are literally cutting off life force energy flowing through you when you feel disconnected. Life force energy and vitality flows through you when there is connection. Connection to the universe at large, connection to other people, and connection to yourself. And I didn't have any of those three, right? And so I felt dread in the morning when I woke up, because like, what's, I didn't feel any, like, there was any meaning to life. Like, it's not like I was suicidal, guys. I was a really high functioning person. I had a career, I had kids, I had, I had everything I needed. Money was no problem, right? Like, we weren't worried about where the next, bill could be paid. Like, there was none of that. So, but now on hindsight, I understand why I used to feel dread when I woke up in the morning, because I was living and I didn't feel purposeful and I didn't feel connected. So, one of the signs that the inner work is working for you is that you will wake up in the morning and you might feel less dread, right? You might be feeling more hopeful. You might be just feeling excited, because now, like, you are, how do I put this? Your entire perspective of how life operates is now breaking down. And that's really scary, but also really exciting all at once, because you're like, holy crap, if I can change my perspective or my attitude towards this, like, what else can I change? Right? And one of the great things about the personal development world is it helps you realize that you have so much control over your life than you realize, right? You have so much control over your attitude and your mindset and your perspective. And that is things that you never were taught that you have control over. And we were being controlled by all the things that were happening around us. And now, when you're starting to, on this healing journey, you're like, oh my God, like, everything in life is the way it is because I have not changed. I need to change in order for everything else outside of me to change. And that gives you so much power. It makes you feel so empowered when you have that realization. So now you wake up in the morning and you're like, I have control over what's going to happen. Like, I can't change anything that's going outside of me externally, but I can change how I feel about that internally. And that makes you feel so excited, because imagine being told that, like, your world was an illusion and you get to create another new illusion that now actually serves you, right? How exciting is that? Number 6, that the inner work is working, even though you're not able to see any external signs yet, is that you're constantly hungry to learn even more about yourself and how you've been limiting yourself. It's once you open that can of worms, you cannot stop. And I love that, right? Which is why I do what I do, because there's always deeper to go and more to learn. And one of the ways that you can tell the inner work is working is you're really drawn to this stuff. Like, if it wasn't working, you wouldn't be picking up that book and reading it. You wouldn't continue to come back to this podcast and listening. There are changes that are happening inside of you. Your soul and your intuition is telling you, lean in deeper to this work. And if it wasn't working, you wouldn't be doing that. So that is a definite sign that it's working. Number 7, you stop convincing and persuading others to see things your way just to prove that you are right, right? We have this innate need in us to prove others wrong and to prove ourselves right. Our ego gets off on that. And when you start on your inner healing journey, you start to realize that the only person you need to convince of anything is yourself, that you don't have any control over anybody else. I used to do a lot of things to try and prove to my kids that they're wrong and I'm right. Like, that's why you get into an argument in the first place, right? I used to feel so, like, hurt by things that my husband would do or wouldn't do. And I would then, have a fight to prove how inconsiderate or thoughtless, or, just not right this person is. And once you start working on yourself, what happens is you realize all of this nitpicking and fighting and arguing was really about, what was it about? Now let me think about this. It's the short-term win we want to have in order to make ourselves feel better, right? And you let go of that when you start the inner healing. Especially when you start to introduce yourself to new ideas, like meditation might be a new thing that you're trying out, and you might be finding benefits from it. And so now instead of the first reaction is to try and get your spouse or your kids to meditate because you want everyone to see how great it is. But when you actually start going on your healing journey a little bit deeper, I always tell my clients, you cannot change others around you. They will start to change when they see the changes in you. So set the example just by being the change, not by telling themselves to do the change, right? And you realize the inner healing is you're doing it because it's important to you, and you stop trying to convince others that you're on the right path, that they need to be doing the same thing. When the inner healing happens, you realize that you don't have anything to prove to anybody, and all you're doing is working on yourself, and that should suffice. Like you're not working on yourself to prove to others how wonderful you are. You are working on yourself so that you can be at peace with yourself. That's what I found in my journey, is that now I've stopped trying to convince or persuade anyone of anything, not just the inner healing, right? Like I'm talking about anything. For instance, I'm trying to think of a recent example I had. So I just decided that I'm going to go on a 12-hour walk this weekend. So by the time you're listening to this episode, I would have already completed it. And I just decided one day, I was like, I read about it. I followed the guy who is, creating this movement. And I was just like, I think I'm going to do that. And in the past, I would have felt the need to convince my husband, or I would have wanted him to think that it was a good idea too. I would have talked to him about it and being like, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Should I do it? And I would have really, allowed what he thought to influence my final decision. But this time, obviously, because I've grown a lot, I had already decided for myself what I wanted to do. And I just said to my husband, I'm thinking of doing this on Saturday. Like, will you be there? Can you help with the kids? Because I will be gone from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., right? There was no convincing or persuading or any amount of energy spent in getting him to see my side of the perspective, right? Of the argument. I wanted to say argument, but that didn't feel like the right word because there was no argument. And that's what I found, right? The more I heal, the more I realize this is my truth. This is important to me. I'm going to go do the thing. And I just need to get support around this. Like, I don't need to convince anyone to get support. Like, I just need support. Whether you agree with me or not, like, just support me because you love me, right? That's usually how the conversation with my husband and I go now. I know he loves me without a shadow of doubt. We have grown so much in the last, almost 20 years that we've been married, but most of it has been in the last, 6 or 7 years. That we have seen quantum leaps in how we operate in our relationship. And one of those is that neither one of us now try to convince the other that something they want is a good idea. If you think it's a good idea and you love it, stand in your truth, right? Present it to the other person and say, this is what I want. Let's support each other. Or let's figure out what kind of support I need from you to make this happen, because this involves me evolving and growing, right? And thriving in life. So you might find that as you start the inner healing, the need to convince or persuade or people please is less and less and less. All right, finally, number 8, you stop blaming others for the things in your life and ask yourself, how am I contributing to this? You start to see that it takes 2 people to contribute to a problem, or multiple people. And you also might start to see that there are 2 sides to every story, including your own life, right? Like how someone sees you and how you see yourself is very different, and everybody's entitled to their own opinion, right? So when you start doing the inner healing work, you start to realize, yes, I am the creator of my life, but I also I cannot create in somebody else's life, and that's okay. And that's okay, right? And you start to take responsibility for how you might be contributing to things in life, whether that is a relationship that's not working, like using the example for before, right? If you have a really loyal, deep friendship, but you find that you've been growing apart, or you start to realize that this friendship is not healthy for you, right? The old you might have been like, well, it's all their fault, right? But the sign that the inner healer is working is to say, yes, this is not a healthy relationship going forward. It doesn't serve me. But how have I been contributing to this dynamic, right? We always, always in our inner healing journey have to take responsibility for anything that we might have contributed. I'm not talking about blaming or shaming yourself. I'm just talking about seeing the truth and taking responsibility so that going forward in another relationship, you can make changes, right? Because if you're doing something, if there's a pattern or if there's some way you're contributing to a relationship that's not helpful, by correcting it and recognizing it in this relationship, you will then correct it in all relationships, right? Because if you're doing it in one, you're probably doing it in a lot. So you start to ask the question of, how do I contribute to this in a good way and not in a negative way? And how can I change it? So, and that again is empowering, because you don't have to wait for the other person to make the changes to make this a healthy relationship. You start to realize, I can take responsibility and correct the things that I have been enabling, and that haven't really helped. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and feel really good about the fact that you are doing the internal work and it is working, even though there might not be physical manifestations of it working in your reality just yet. Remember that word, yet. So don't give up on the work. Persist. And remember, it's always okay to get support. In fact, when you get support, the results come even faster. And so if you're feeling called to get support, then I insist that you reach out to me through email, visa@visalakshi.com. And let's dig a little deeper into what's going on and what are the reasons you're feeling called or pulled to get, support and coaching. And let's really blow up your life in a really fantastic way in 4 months. You guys, it only takes really 4 months to get deeply, deeply stuck into this work and make a hell of a lot of changes, so that in 4 months' time, you're looking back and going, oh my gosh, like that was me 4 months ago. Like, people overestimate what they can do in a month and underestimate what happens in 4 months. So if that's you, check out the show notes. The link to book the call is there, and I look forward to speaking to you. I love you guys so much. Take care.